On to conditions of performance, there are several things we need to note. There can be, of course, conditions precedent, meaning that something needs to happen for a contract to take place. I see this in real estate contracts where maybe a person would agree to purchase a home, but they need to effect some repairs, fix the fence or fix the garage door, or, paint the house, and, some of those used to be required by FHA or whatever it might be, but they were conditions that were precedent or things that needed to happen in order for the contract to actually be in effect. Then there's some conditions subsequent, which might say that if this happens, after we've come to an agreement, it needs to happen. Well, let me go find you the example because it's a better example than what I had. I looked it up myself because I'm always struggling sometimes to find good examples. So it says, for example, if the dingbat company closes its business, the supplier wouldn't be required to fulfill the contract, right, or deliver, the product. So, something happens after, the contract's been signed, that you're going to deliver a product or whatever, but obviously in that case, the company goes out of business or something, then they're relieved from their obligation. And it gives another example. If daughter-in-law Beatrice terminates her marriage to son Reggie, her interest in the real property would terminate and revert to the grantor. So you could see that, mom and dad may be leaving property, and they might be doing it to both parties, son and daughter-in-law, for gifting reasons, and there's a lot of tax reasons and whatnot. You might do that, but you might say, if they get divorced, we don't want her part to go to her. We want it to go to the grandkids then or something. So that would be a condition subsequent. And then lastly is conditions concurrent. Those are the things that again, most contracts probably have conditions concurrent. I pay you and you deliver, the coffee to me, and it means they basically happen at the same time. Granted, there may be seconds or minutes, or could be even hours, but it basically means at the same time that those conditions would happen. Express contracts we've talked about, and then implied contracts we've also talked about, and what those means in terms of performance and whatnot would be similar to up here. So order of performance. Normally we look to the contract if it says that, but if it's not addressed, then payment generally comes before delivery. We usually have to pay Amazon before they, using PayPal or using our credit card before they're going to ship things off, right? Okay. Delivery just says that UCC gap fillers. And UCC is Universal Commercial Code. Again, it's a common set of laws that have been passed by all 50 states that help make the transfer and sale of goods and services, mostly goods, I believe, across the state borders, make it really possible and actually very simple and seamless. To tender means to make goods available. Okay, and so you may tender the goods, but what if they don't come and pick them up? Well, you've fulfilled your obligation in that case. Okay, if they were required as a part of the contract to actually come and pick them up. Okay, to tender is just to make them available. To say, hey, I've got them and they're here, and you're welcome to come get them anytime. So levels of performance can be complete. Everybody's, they've finished everything. It's wonderful. It's all done. And I think when levels of performance, we often think of construction types of things. Okay. So substantial means falling short after an honest attempt, and this may happen more often than we think. A contractor's working on something. Maybe they get the house all done. It's completely done. It's in move-in condition. It's ready to go, but the landscaping isn't done. Okay, and the weather gets in the way. Now they may be obligated to finish that, but the person that's buying the house or that contracted with them to have it built can't say, I'm going to wait and pay you when that landscaping gets done. No, their performance would be considered substantial, and you'd have to pay them an amount, okay, equal to, what percentage of the contract is deemed to have been fulfilled, withholding an amount maybe to pay for the landscaping in the spring when that comes up, okay. And so, just because a contract hasn't been completed all the way doesn't mean you're relieved of an obligation to pay for it. If it's substantial, you're going to have to pay. Now, material breach is just less than acceptable at all. So they just, maybe they pulled the equipment out and turned a little dirt, but that isn't in any way fulfilling a construction contract, right? And so you would in that case be relieved of any necessity to pay. So divisibility of performance. This gets a little bit, for me, this gets a little bit complex. Okay, we can understand, that employment pay periods or employment contracts, can be divisible. And I suppose even broken down by the day, right? If you get paid by the week, but you work 4 days out of 5, okay, it's segments, it's divisible. They say that construction contracts are generally not divisible, and I think what they mean by that is that a contract is a contract, and that's where we determine whether the performance is complete or partial or substantial, or not. And so the contract itself, we don't say that each, when your employment, if you finish a week of work, maybe your contract is for a year, but if you finish a week of work, that's done, right? But we don't divide up a construction contract to say, and say that, you're done because you finished this portion of it. You still need to fulfill the contract. And so I think that that's the subtle difference there when they talked about that and why they say construction contracts are generally not divisible. Probably not meaningful for you guys, but when I used to finance some construction things, architects would come in and certify that a certain percent of the contract was done, and we would advance the funds then to pay for that certain percent. And so when I started reading this, I thought, oh, of course construction contracts are divisible, because that's kind of how we looked at it, but not really the case. The contract itself still needs to be completed, right? So discharge, a party can get discharged from their obligation to perform, obviously if they've completed it, right? If they tendered their performance or tendered the product, the subject matter, whatever, made it available, but it was rejected, okay, they can be discharged. Impossibility of performance, and that can happen. If somebody dies, if the contractor is a small company. We've had one guy do a lot of work for us on some rental units that we take care of, and we've had contracts, and if he were to pass away, well, it'd be tough for me to enforce it, right? I don't think I could go to his heirs and say, you guys got to come and finish this, right? Because it'd probably be impossible. They probably don't have that same skill set. Commercial impracticability is something that's, kind of similar. And maybe this isn't that bad of an example. Weather, things like that, natural disasters, fire, like we've had here, things like that could make, the delivery or the performance of a contract impossible. Maybe you contracted to sell wheat. I don't know if you'd get allowed out of this one or not. That'd be interesting to ask. And a fire came along and burnt up all your wheat fields. Would that be considered commercial impracticability and allow you out of the contract? Yeah, it might be. Waiver or release, and I think the book kind of tries to define these separately, but they're pretty much the same. I think it's a nuance when you get into what the difference is, and basically just says that one party can allow the other party to walk. Okay, so you can give a waiver or release. And that happens, that's often negotiated. If a party, again, maybe it becomes impractical or impossible, maybe the case that I said about the wheat, the elevator wanting to get the guy's business again in the future might well say, okay, we understand, we'll walk away from the contract, simply because, we want your business in the future, right? That would be a waiver or a release. Substantial performance, again, we've kind of talked about that, and that of course, you could be discharged if you were said to have completed most of it, and you were paid for that part of it. Anyhow, you might not get paid for the whole thing, right? And performance for part of a divisible contract, which we talked about some of those differences there a little bit. Duty of performance under a contract is discharged because of commercial impracticability and possibility of performance. Yes, it can be. So efficient breach, what if you could walk away from an economically harmful contract yet fully compensate the other party? You've breached the contract but made restitution. Do you owe the other party anything further? I would say maybe. Have you acted ethically? Again, I would say maybe. And could such an act harm you in the future? And kind of the example that we used to have this happen sometimes in banking, and maybe we made a loan to somebody to purchase a house, okay, and they got into a bind and couldn't continue to make the payments on that house, and so they would deed the property to us, right? Okay, so in essence, they kind of deeded the property back to us, and it may or may not have been full compensation. If we sold the property and didn't get the full amount, technically we could still go after the borrower for the rest. But, again, that might be where we would do a release or a waiver, and we would at sometimes, right? Do you owe the other party anything further? Again, that's why I said maybe, because in some cases, yeah, maybe. Have you acted ethically? Well, in a lot of cases when, unfortunately, we had a few times. Most times when we were foreclosing or going after people, it was because they were idiots, often drugs, alcohol, gambling, those types of things. But there was occasionally when it was just nasty stuff that happened to people, medical, bad luck, legitimate bad luck, those types of things. And they would act very ethically. They would turn the property back over, and usually we'd forgive the balance in a case like that. Be happy that they treated us as well as they could. And so in those cases, it was ethical. In some cases, if they just did it because they wanted to walk away from the debt, even though they were working and still making $150,000 a year, I would say that's not ethical. So for me, that was a maybe. Could such an act harm you in the future? The answer to that would be yeah. And the example that I'm giving you, it could negatively impact your credit. So. Agency. Briefly, we talk a little bit about agency. We have principles. In fact, let's take a break there, and we'll come back and finish on that. So.